Hey, and welcome back to the Adorned Heart podcast. My name is Madeline. In this episode, I want to pick back up where I left off in the last episode. So I wasn't able to share everything that happened in my abusive marriage that really led me to leave my ex-husband. First of all, because my computer would not let me download the video any longer than it was. And so there were a lot of things that I had to cut out. And there were also some things that I forgot to mention just because I was going off the top of my head. And so I want to talk about some things today that I did not mention in the last podcast. And before we start, I just want to thank everybody who commented on my last episode. All of your comments meant so much to me. My purpose in sharing all of this online was to help people who are in the same situation as me. And so I'm so glad that I was able to do that. And I am so sorry for everyone who has gone through domestic violence and is still going through it today. It is absolutely horrible, and it is not God's will for marriage. As I said in my last episode, abuse is 100% a biblical reason to leave. And that was something that God really had to reveal to me, because I personally always thought that divorce was wrong no matter what the circumstances were. But if you listened to my last episode, you know that God revealed to me that that is not true. And thankfully, God has given me freedom from my ex-husband in a lot of ways. And after this episode, I do plan on doing a post-divorce episode where I talk about how co-parenting has been, how the divorce went, and I really just want to share my advice to anyone who may be going through the same thing or is contemplating filing for divorce. I want to share with you all of the wisdom that I have gained through this experience and everything that God has taught me. All right, so that being said, let's get into this episode. So one thing that I did not mention in my last episode was actually something very big that happened. So after my daughter was born, my first daughter, when she was about 1 month old, I asked my ex-husband to watch her so I could go to the grocery store. I really just wanted a break from having her. And so I went to the grocery store. I was gone for about 30 minutes. We lived right next to the grocery store. I could walk there if I wanted to. And so it was like a 2-minute drive. I'm pretty sure I went just to go get ice cream. But when I came back, I walked into my daughter, who was screaming, crying. And this wasn't a normal cry of hers. Immediately, I could tell that something was off. And so I asked my ex-husband what happened. Why is she crying like this? He was tearing up too. And after I asked him what happened, he told me that when I left, she would not stop crying. And so he told me that he hit her in the stomach when she was only 1 month old to try to get her to stop crying. And when he did that, he said that she lost her breath, like she went like, and she stopped breathing. He said it scared him so much because he thought that he had killed her. Thank God he did not. But he clearly, knocked the wind out of her. And I honestly could not believe what he told me. It felt unreal. I honestly went into complete shock. I had no idea what to do because I never thought he would ever do that. He had never hit me like that. I shared the story about how he backed me into a wall and punched a hole in the wall next to my head, but he didn't actually punch me. And so this was not something I ever expected him to do to my daughter, to our daughter. And as he was saying this, he was crying. He was genuinely crying and apologizing. My guard immediately went up. I knew from this moment on that he was very dangerous. Internally, I could feel it, and I always did feel it, but it brought it to another level. I actually tried to kind of rebuke him in a way. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I remember saying something along the lines that I couldn't trust him, or that I couldn't believe he actually did that after he had apologized, and he instantly shot back at me to get me to stop talking, and it worked. And I was honestly just in so much shock. He promised me that he would never do it again, but he never allowed me to bring that back up. And then when I would, he denied it and basically said I was making things up and exaggerating. And I share this to say that, abusers are unpredictable and they typically get worse with time. The Bible actually says that evildoers will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. And this 100% applies to abusive people. God is able to change anybody, but they have to be willing to change. And the Bible is clear that there are some people who will not change, but who will only get worse. And that was exactly how it was with my ex-husband. So I don't really remember what happened after I told my husband, how could you do this? And then he shot back at me, trying to get me to stop talking. But I remember the next day, I looked at her stomach to see if there were any bruises, and there weren't any. Thankfully, he didn't hurt her nearly as bad as he could have. But later on, I did end up reporting this to CPS, but they said that they couldn't do anything because there wasn't any evidence. And as far as I'm aware, he hasn't done anything like this since then. I don't really know what all goes on behind closed doors when it's his weekend to have our daughters, but they are old enough to tell me if something like that would have happened. And they haven't told me that, thank God. I pray for their protection every single day. But after this happened, I did try to leave him multiple times. This was a huge, huge motivating factor in me attempting to leave, even though it took me 4 or 5 times, I don't remember how many, to finally leave him without going back to him. I did attempt to leave after this because, obviously I wanted to protect my daughter. I knew he wasn't safe, but I was so emotionally manipulated by him that I would always return until that final time that I did leave. And so if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're in an abusive situation like this where your partner is laying hands on your children, leave. God does not want you to stay with a man who is hurting you and your children. It is not okay. It is not acceptable. The Bible is clear that God hates violence, especially against the innocent. And Jesus actually said that it is better to tie a millstone around your neck than to cause any of his little ones to stumble. Domestic violence and abuse deeply, deeply impacts children. And it's not okay. One thing that my ex-husband used to always say to me when I would try to leave him or bring up that I wanted a divorce was all the statistics of children who grow up with single mothers without a father in the home. And while there are definitely statistics proving that children who grow up in a single parent household, especially in a single mother household, have issues because of that, it is actually worse for them to grow up in a home where there's domestic violence and abuse happening. Even if the children themselves are not being abused, just them witnessing the abuse that your partner is putting you through is extremely devastating and traumatic for them. And there have been studies that have actually shown that it is better for children to grow up with their parents being divorced and living in a peaceful home, in peaceful separate homes, than to live with both of their parents where there is domestic violence and a lot of arguing and turmoil happening in the home. So if you're afraid to leave your abusive spouse or partner because you're afraid of what would happen if you quote unquote break up the family, as they like to say, just know that it is better for your child to grow up with their parents divorced or being raised by one parent than to grow up in a home where there is abuse and domestic violence. Not only do children need their parents, but they need peace. They need security. And if their home with both parents is not secure, but is dangerous and toxic, that does a lot more damage to them. And so you are protecting your children by leaving your abusive partner. No matter what he tries to tell you, you are protecting them. I also want to share something else that happened that was related to my ex-husband's porn addiction. So this was after my first daughter was born as well. At this time, I was spending a lot of time with God and really getting into reading my word. When I would put my daughter down for a nap, I would go out on our porch and just read my Bible and drink my coffee. And it was like the best hour of my day. Like I felt so captivated by what I was reading in the Bible. I felt so close to God at this time in my life. Even with everything I was going through, with all of my blindsidedness and my ignorance, I really felt close to God at this time. And one of the nights that I went to bed, I had this dream where I had this revelation about how none of our works can save us. It was like I was having this revelation. I was going through the Old Testament. I was going through all the laws, and God revealed to me in this dream just the gravity of how worthless our good works are. And he was showing me that before Jesus, nobody could get into heaven. Nobody was good enough. Nobody met the mark. Like, we all failed. And it was such a crazy dream. And then after I had this revelation, it was like I saw Jesus's hands, and he grabbed my hands and like held my hands, and I saw the holes in his hands. And it was just such an intimate like dream. I knew God was speaking to me and revealing himself to me and just bringing me deeper. And in the same night, God spoke to my ex-husband in a dream. When he woke up, he told me he had a dream that God was talking to him, and he was giving him this presentation on like, it was like a PowerPoint slideshow, something like that. And it was about adultery. And God was telling him that he was committing adultery by watching pornography. And in the dream, this is just what he told me. He said God told him that he was going to kill him for the adultery that he was committing towards me through his porn addiction. When he told me that, I was in such shock, like, because I never knew where pornography stood with God and how he felt about it. And through that dream, God was showing me that God was going to bring me justice for everything that my ex-husband put me through with that porn addiction, how much it crushed me and destroyed my self-esteem. And so I just want to share that for anybody who is with somebody who has a porn addiction, that God is not okay with it at all. I don't really know what else to say about it because it's so crazy, but that's literally what he told me when he woke up that morning. And I really don't think he made it up, because why would you even say that? Like that, he just made himself look bad. And I'm pretty sure at the time he hadn't confessed to me that he was still struggling with it until he had that dream. So anyways, I really believe it was God giving him that dream, because God visited me like in my sleep that night and gave me like a crazy revelation about salvation. And so that's all I have to say about that. One thing I did not mention in the last episode was that sometimes in arguments that me and my ex-husband would get into, he would throw things at me. And it wasn't big, heavy stuff. It was more like hangers and sometimes trash. Thankfully, he never hurt me by doing that, but that was just another way that he was abusive. He was also very spiritually abusive. He would tell me that God was revealing things to him about me. For example, sin in my life that wasn't actually true. One time when we were dating, he took me to Burger King, and we sat down waiting for our food, and I believe the person delivered us our food to our table, if I'm remembering correctly. And when the man gave it to us, I smiled really big and was like, thank you so much. And my ex-husband accused me of flirting with him. I genuinely was just trying to be friendly because I wanted to show like the love of Jesus to him. I was not attracted to him or anything. I wasn't trying to flirt with him, but he accused me of flirting with him. And he told me that in that moment, God revealed to him that I have a spirit of lust, that I had a spirit of lust. And he acted completely disgusted with me and put up this wall and was acting angry towards me and dismissive and avoidant, even after I genuinely told him I'm sorry and that was not my intention at all. I was just trying to be happy and friendly so that I could show somebody the love of Jesus, because, you know, I used to be an extremely rude person, and that was something I was really working on at the time, was just being nice to people. But he acted like he had gotten this revelation from God. And even though I knew that wasn't my intention in my heart, I felt guilty and like what he was saying was true. And I remember really praying about that after, because I felt so bad. I didn't ever want to come off as being unfaithful to my ex-husband. Even when we were dating, I never wanted to be flirtatious, because that was something God really convicted me about in ministry school. There was also a specific time after we got married where we were having an intimate moment, and in the middle of what we were doing or talking about, my ex-husband had this weird like look come over him, and I asked him, what is going on? Why are you looking like that? And he told me that God was revealing to him that I was like a child and that I was immature. And I actually can't believe he said this, but he told me that it was hard for him to even look at me after this, because he literally saw me as a child, like physically saw me in that moment as a child. And he told me God was giving him this revelation, which, you know, made me feel very vulnerable and insecure. You know, he would always use God to tear me down and to tear down my self-esteem and to falsely accuse me of things. And the way he would do it too was just so patronizing and demeaning. And honestly, it always led me questioning myself and my relationship with God and how God felt about me. I don't know if what he thought he was, you know, receiving from God was actually just randomly coming into his mind, or if he was intentionally doing this to tear me down by, you know, deceiving me and making things up. I don't know. Either way, it really severely affected me. And I do believe that is a common thing that abusive men will do when they are using God to abuse you, because that is one way that they really like to have power over you. They will use God's name, they will use the Bible, they will use spirituality to control you and make you feel like they are some supreme authority over you. And not just that they're your leader, as, you know, your husband. They use that position of power to spiritually deceive you and abuse you. And this was honestly something I didn't really realize until after we had gotten divorced, or maybe towards the end of our marriage. I have this voice recording that I recorded right before I left him for the final time, and I really want to share it. My mom is telling me not to because she's afraid I could get sued for defamation or something like that. And so I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you know anything about legalities. Like, I intentionally do not share his name. I don't share pictures of him. I don't show our children's faces on the internet. I'm very intentional about that. And so I don't know if you know anything about the legal system. Would that be something he could sue me over if I share a voice recording. Because I really believe it would be so insightful to people to show what spiritual abuse and emotional abuse sounds like. But anyways, and so the next thing that I want to talk about is his road rage. My ex-husband had severe road rage. Almost every single time we were in the car, he would be cussing people out, honking at them, tailing them. And I want to share one specific incident of his road rage that really scared me, besides the incident where he threatened to kill me and my children. This was, I think, a few months before I left. This was one of the final incidents that led up to me leaving. So at the time, one of our cars had completely broken down. We had to sell it to the junkyard. And so we only had one car. And if he wasn't using his work van, I would have to drop him off at work. And so one morning, I went with him to go to work with our daughter. He was so upset in the car because there was a ton of traffic. We live in a city that had a lot of traffic in South Carolina. It was the morning rush hour, and there was this mom driving a van next to us with a bunch of kids, I'm pretty sure, in the car. And he freaked out on her. He was honking at her. He was literally following her car and cussing at her. He pulled out his phone to start recording her and, was going off. He was trying to blame her for a mistake he made driving. He was not a good driver, and he was also a very dangerous driver. Anyways, I stood up to him and I got really rude with him. I was like, I don't even remember what I said, but he did not like that. He never allowed me to say anything to him without, verbally punishing me. I think I just stopped talking to him and was ignoring him because I was so angry. He was just accusing me of leaving him. He's like, are you gonna leave now? And when we get to his work, he's supposed to give me the keys so that I can drive me and my oldest daughter home. I don't remember, again, if my youngest daughter was in there or not. But I was supposed to drive us home. And he told me he was not going to give me the keys back because he thought I was going to leave him. And he told me I could figure out how to get home on my own. And I started crying. I had to literally cry and beg him to give me the keys and promise that I wasn't going to leave him. And he finally did. And, it was sometime after that. I don't remember how soon after that it was, but it was when I was gearing up to officially leave him. There were a few months before I finally left where it was basically the final test, and I was seeing if he was actually gonna change, because at this point I knew God wanted me to leave. I wanted to leave, but I didn't have the strength in me to actually do it. I didn't have the faith to leave him, like my friend's pastor told me when I shared about that in the last episode. But sometime during these last few months before I left, I remember telling him that I wanted to take a break from our marriage. I wanted to go to Florida to visit my family for a week. And he told me that I was not allowed to leave and that he was going to put a GPS on the car to track the car to make sure that I wouldn't leave and to monitor my location. And he also told me that he was going to take the keys, that I wouldn't be allowed to have the car at all, which fully convinced me, that I needed to leave, because that's just crazy. Normal people don't do that. I was only asking for a week break from him, and he wouldn't even give that to me. And he was threatening to take away all my freedoms. He became extremely controlling towards the end of our relationship. He basically tried to completely cut off my relationship with my mom because, she told me that I was in an abusive marriage and she tried to help me leave. And he also told me I needed to stop talking to my friend, who was also telling me the same thing. His dad actually is a lot like him, and I believe he got a lot of behaviors from his father. And so he grew up basically in the same situation that we were in, but watching his parents go through that. And he completely sided with his father and blamed everything on his mom. He hated his mom. He was somewhat nice to her in person a lot of the time, but he would talk so badly about her and how manipulative she was and how his dad had to put up with so much with her. And his mom wasn't perfect, but she was not like his father. And he would always tell me, how his parents worked it out and how they're still together, and that, we're weak for wanting to get a divorce and not work things out, and how it was wrong because his parents stuck it out and went through counseling and everything. So that was another manipulative thing that he would use to try to get me to stay with him. And the last thing I want to share is just some advice. So I believe this was maybe a month or maybe less before I left. I started talking to the counselor that we had gone to for marriage counseling to get her advice because she knew my ex-husband was abusive, and I asked her for advice on what to do because I told her, I want to get a divorce. And she told me, if you want to leave, you have to gather evidence. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you need voice recordings, videos, you need proof that he is abusive. And so I stayed during those last few weeks and I voice recorded him when he was being abusive. And I was able to use that in our divorce paperwork, in my affidavit, and in our court hearing. Unfortunately, I did delete most of our texts after the third time I left him and came back, I believe. It was the time before the last time that I left him. I deleted all of our text messages because I didn't want to remember anything that he had told me and the way that he talked to me. I just wanted to forget it. I wanted a clean slate. I thought maybe this time he really would change, and he didn't. And so I really, really, really regretted deleting all those text messages. So if you are in an abusive marriage and you plan on leaving, gather evidence, screenshot your text messages. Do not delete them, or emails. If your partner is physically abusive, you are supposed to have doctor's visits proving the physical abuse. Police reports will help if you've ever called the police on him. Voice recordings, videos, any evidence that you can gather helps. And also having people who are willing to be witnesses. So for example, I had 2 other people write an affidavit basically affirming the claims that I was making about my ex-husband. And the laws vary state to state. In South Carolina, it is legal to use voice recordings from private conversations, even if the individual does not know that they're being recorded. It is legal to use those recordings for court purposes. Thank God, because that was a huge help throughout my divorce case. But if it's not legal where you are, Google it, research what the laws are in your state regarding that. I don't want to talk too much about the divorce process in this video because I want to save it for the next podcast. But do your research before you leave. Go to a counselor, get in contact with a lawyer who will guide you in what you need to do in order to leave. If there are women's shelters, get in touch with them. They have a lot of resources to help you. Unless you are literally fleeing in the moment for your safety, it is so important to have a plan in place and to have all the evidence you need to prove your case in court, because without it, you are possibly giving your abusive partner a really big upper hand in the divorce, and you don't want that. You want to be able to defend yourself. And using evidence that is, true evidence and not falsified in any way, there is nothing ungodly about that. It is godly to hold people accountable, even if it's to the law, okay? The Bible says that we are supposed to submit to governing authorities. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with using everything you can to prove that your partner is abusive, that your husband is being abusive towards you. You are bringing the truth to light. And the Bible says that we are supposed to expose darkness, okay? So do not feel guilty for doing that, because that is one thing I really felt. I felt guilty I felt like I was framing him. I felt like I was ruining his reputation. And in all honesty, he was reaping the consequences of what he had done. It is not godly to hide abuse and to protect people's reputation who do not deserve to have their reputation protected, okay? Abuse needs to be exposed, not only to protect yourself, but to protect other people in the future. God is a God of justice. God loves justice, okay? So do not feel guilty for doing that. And so that is all I have to share for this episode. In the next episode, like I said, I plan on talking about the divorce and how co-parenting has been since then, everything about our post-divorce. And so I really hope that you were able to join me for that episode. I really believe it will bless you and help you, especially, if you're going through this yourself. Again, thank you so much for watching, and like I said, I hope that you'll be able to join me for the next episode. Bye.